the idea of a personal rebrand. We're going to touch a little bit on this weird personal brand culture that has everyone in some kind of stranglehold. And then we're also going to talk about how, as actual brands, we can insert ourselves into this conversation and really use it to our benefit. If you are a CPG brand, a brand in the beauty space, there's a really interesting opportunity to harness this energy around personal rebrand and sort of move towards a subscription and routine focused top of funnel campaign.
I love working with Pilot House because while we are a performance marketing agency, we really pride ourselves on caring so much about brand and creative. At Pilot House, we don't just make ads, we craft them. Every edit, every word, every scroll-stopping detail is built with purpose and care, and I truly believe that care drives creativity and creativity drives results. Our attention to both scale and brand allows us to craft strategies that deliver you short-term results while making you long-term successful, which is so important for any DTC brand. If you are curious about learning more about working with Pilot House, you can fill out a lead form at pilothouse.co and let them know you want to go on a brand new ad venture. You don't actually have to say that. You don't have to make a pun. I'm not going to force you to make a pun. Just fill out the lead form. We'd love to chat with you.
Hi, welcome back to Ad-venturous, the podcast produced by DTC and hosted by me, AVEs. Today is the last episode of this conversation around rebranding, when to do it, why to do it, the good, the bad, and the ugly. To get you up to speed, if you haven't been listening, the first episode, we talked about a couple of rebrands that didn't go so well, and we talked about why that might be, and really dived into the idea of relevancy for your current audience and how to really diagnose that a brand requires a rebrand, because I do believe that a lot of the times we get nervous and we throw everything out, including the kitchen sink, because we're not seeing the performance that we want to, but we don't really stop and reflect why that might be, and we don't dive into what our main personas and segments actually want to see from us. And that's usually when we kind of pull the trigger on a rebrand that doesn't really need to happen. And then last week we talked about a very successful rebrand, which was Old Spice. I talked about this a little bit last week, but I really wanted to identify a brand who had rebranded that you don't really even associate them with doing a rebrand. And I think Old Spice was the perfect candidate because their rebrand was so successful that their current imagery, their current marketing, which is from like 15 years ago, so it's not that current, but it is what you think of when you think about the brand. And to me, that signals a really successful rebrand, right? Like nobody is sitting around yearning for the Old Spice because they might have passed away. That is how old that brand is. And also because they've so successfully not completely pivoted, but just updated both the look of their brand as well as the sentimentality behind their brand to the point where, like I said, we don't even associate them with being someone who executed a rebrand because they did it so well. Today, I want to talk about the idea of a personal rebrand. So we're going to touch a little bit on this weird personal brand culture that has everyone in some kind of stranglehold. And then we're also going to talk about how, as actual brands, we can insert ourselves into this conversation and really use it to our benefit. But I just wanted to, kind of give you guys a lay of the land in case you are not as online as I am. I don't even think I'm that online for the job that I have. I think that there's more benefit to me going outside than staying inside all the time on my phone. But anyway, if looking at what's going on in the internet is not your full-time job, or if you just don't have as much time to do it as a woman in her 20s, let me bring you up to speed. This year, I really observed that the whole new year, new me trope was replaced by something adjacent, something new, and something, in my opinion, kind of weird. And that is the idea of a personal rebrand. On the surface, it's not a big deal, but I don't think anything in this world solely exists at the surface level, not icebergs, and also certainly not pimples. So I wanted to really dive into this idea of a personal rebrand and what it means. So while I was prepping for this episode, I was looking into search insights, particularly around the term personal rebrand and also around the term personal brand. What I found was really interesting, which is that the term personal brand tends to garner more search and related search terms as well than personal rebrand. But personal rebrand did spike over the last year, so 2025, and particularly in the summertime. So what I think is really kind of interesting about that observation, and what I've seen as well from behaviors on different platforms, is that a personal rebrand can happen at any point in the year, where new year, new me has always been subjugated to the end of Q4 and the beginning of Q1. And I think it's an interesting angle, and it's an interesting entry point into a customer's life, especially if we're looking at subscription-based businesses. Building a ritual, building a positive habit is something that, like I mentioned, oftentimes is really the focal point of the end of Q4, early Q1, but it is always relevant. I feel like some of my most healthy habits I've picked up at random times in the year, because that is when motivation strikes. It is not when I'm in the middle of my time off around the holidays and playing like hours of Nintendo Switch every day. It is, in fact, maybe in March or April when you kind of actually start thinking about introducing those rituals and routines. So it presents a really interesting opportunity, I think, the idea of a personal rebrand being evergreen, not so focused in one particular point in time. And yeah, I wanted to talk a little bit about the relationship too before we really get into this between a personal brand and a personal rebrand, because I think for me, this kind of all roots back to the commodification of identity in online spaces, and this idea I've been talking about an omnipresent brand and how to exist as more than just an item in someone's life, but a true marker of their identity and personhood. I kind of say this every single time we talk about this. I mean, that is really weird, and I don't like it, and I don't subscribe to it, but I do think that's just where the general culture is right now, so it's important to recognize. And I think there's a big difference, in my opinion, and I think it's really interesting that we've brought in this language into personal goal setting and personal growth that is so tied back to brands. And I think, in my opinion, brands should be very consistent. Brands should map out who they are at their conception, and they should show up accordingly for their entire lives, unless, of course, like we talked about with Old Spice last week, there's a necessity for a rebrand. So you've really dated yourself, you're not appealing to new customers. But they should be sort of unwaveringly dedicated to that crafted identity if they want to be successful. The most successful brands, hands down, are the ones that remain faithful to the identity that they've crafted and set out for themselves. And it's usually quite strategic, right? But people, on the other hand, should change and evolve and move alongside time. Like, I fear that's the whole point of life. Learning, changing, growing. It's just, those are just other words for living, in my opinion. Like, if you are a person, you should always be evolving. And I think about this a lot in the context of personal brands versus real brands, because I think it's really important to like tear those things apart and really get into how we're using that language, and again, how it might help us get a foot in the door when we're approaching a culture that is sort of starting to see themselves as brands and not these living, moving things. So yes, I have always been very grossed out by the idea of personal brands. So I am also grossed out by the idea of a personal rebrand. But like I mentioned, there's a couple of different ways that I think as a brand you can deploy this moment in culture. And I wanted to chat through them today. The first is going to be around what I mentioned before, the evergreen nature of a personal rebrand. If you are specifically a CPG brand, if you are even, I would say, like a brand in the beauty space, there's a really interesting opportunity to harness this energy around personal rebrand and sort of move towards a subscription and routine focused top of funnel campaign, which is a lot of word salad. So let's use our knife and fork and cut through to the meat on that one. I don't think that's a very good way to use a lot of expressions, but what I'm saying to you is, if you're a brand where subscription models are important to you, there is opportunity this year and probably for a couple of years to really play up this idea of establishing routine throughout the entire calendar year. And I know you're probably already hopefully doing that, but there's just something out there right now where people are, again, really interested in the subject matter and really interested in elevating their everyday experience in a way that I've never really seen before. So there's, like I mentioned, opportunity to start experimenting at the top of your funnels with creative and content that really visually brings people into the world of your brand and establishes you as a routine, a sort of ritual alongside their everyday functions in life. And so it's really, for me, exciting about that is it means I'm sort of cutting out this part in the middle, because I've worked with some subscription brands in both the sort of CPG space, beauty space, whatever we want to call it. Well, actually, those are different spaces, so we want to call those different things. But anyway, I've worked with brands in both of those spaces, and what I've found is that oftentimes we think about mapping out funnels from two very distinct points of view. We think about bringing people in at the top of the pyramid, at the very top of the funnel, and we think about those net new cold eyeballs. And so we bucket them into a different group than folks we're looking to convert to subscribers. And so this is a big conversation primarily around life cycle marketing, right? So we're thinking about people at the very top of the funnel who are cold to the brand, and we just want to bring them into maybe a hero product. And this is a strategy I've used. It's worked very well. You want to bring them into your top selling product as a one-time purchaser, and then let the retention side do the rest, because it is so beautiful when it all works together in perfect harmony and equilibrium. And I do think that's still a very valid strategy, and that's what you should be doing as sort of a foundational piece if you are a subscription-based brand. But there's now opportunity to sell people on more of a brand experience than a product itself that I don't think necessarily existed previous to this personal brand and personal rebrand era. Because like I mentioned, if your identity is kind of scattered out across the products that you use every single day, the functionality of those products is secondary to you versus what the brand itself brings to your life. It's almost like a bit of a, what's it called when you like placebo effect? That's it. It's almost like a bit of a placebo effect, because the brand and the product is technically elevating your life because you like seeing it, you like having it around, you like being able to mention, I use what's a subscription I have? Vita Glow. It's like collagen, ingestible collagen. I guess I'm talking about it now, but I don't really talk about it that much because it's really gross. It tastes like fish. Anyway, I shouldn't give examples of products I use because then I'm like really rambling to you guys. But anyway, if I was someone who was really in this omnipresent brand era and really saw the idea of, having enough capacity to think about ingestible collagen, I would want to be posting and talking about Vita Glow all the time, because it is a brand that is pretty popular at the moment. So it could establish a bit of social notoriety for me if I was looking to be a content creator, or even just looking to establish that upper echelon wellness aesthetic to my friends and family. So Vita Glow as a product, it's really hard to monitor how it's actually functioning, right? Like, it's ingestible collagen. I don't know. I'm going to be so real with you guys. I don't know if it is working. I think it is. I think it's good for me to be doing, but I don't know. Truly, from the bottom of my heart, I don't know if taking ingestible collagen every day is a thing that makes sense to do. But what I'm trying to describe here is this process of wanting to show off the fact that I am subscribed to Vita Glow by, promoting it on my organic personal Instagram, things like that, instead of really focusing on what the product is doing for me. So if I'm someone, again, who's really bought into this omnipresent brand era and who really ties my sense of self and personhood to the products and brands that I use, if I start to see an influx of people posting about Vita Glow and talking about Vita Glow, and I'm seeing ads all over the place about Vita Glow, I am going to feel an inherent belonging by hitting that subscription button rather than just a one-time purchase. And subscriptions have always been something quite tricky, especially on the DTC side, because if you're a first-time purchaser, why would I buy something for the next 6 months when I don't even know if I'll like one version of it? So it is very hard from a CAC point of view to focus on subscription models. But like I mentioned, I do think there's this opportunity through creative and media techniques to really socially swarm your audience. And like I mentioned, give that impression of every single person is talking about this consumable, right? Like everyone is posting about it. I'm seeing great reviews. I'm seeing ads. And again, if you are really in the omnipresent brand era, what it comes down to is looking for a sense of belonging right now. When folks are quite separate, we're all on those darn phones all the time. So wanting that sense of belonging and immediately clicking that subscribe button based on, again, not the product, but the brand and what the brand's presence in your life is going to do for you rather than the actual product. And so a couple of things I want to talk about is how to do that first and foremost from a content point of view. And so I mentioned the idea of social swarming there. I think what I love doing when I have the opportunity to is figuring out how to make a targeted persona feel like my brand is everywhere. And I think that's what all of us should kind of thrive and want to do every day. But I would suggest if you are, like I mentioned, CPG, beauty, someone where subscription rates are a difference maker in your account, I would say looking at content from a, first of all, persona-specific lens. So I think I say this every episode, but if you don't know who you're talking to, especially on Meta, at this point in time, your content is not going to work as well as it once did. It is so important to come into the act of content creation and creative strategy translation with a high level of intent so that you make sure your ads are laser focused on the person they're supposed to be hitting. So you want to take a step back, look at a persona and figure out, I talk about this a lot too, what is the visual language that they're speaking? So on organic content made by these folks, what type of captions are they using? Are they using filters? How do they shoot things? Is it POV? Is it selfie style? Get into the nitty gritty. What does the content look like? And then you want to focus in on what do these people look like, because there's probably a wide variety. And what do the people look like that are sort of trusted tenants in this community? And I will typically look for sort of search volume of celebrities or influencers to kind of guide my way into figuring out who the people with influence look like in these communities. It's a really understated part of a strategy, but really important to do. And then I'll figure out as well what matters to this group of people, as we always do when we're trying to market to someone. So what are the actual problems that this product is solving? I've talked a lot when we're speaking about this era we're in now, where brand is so dominant and so important that the more utilitarian side of marketing can kind of fall to the wayside. I think it's still important to understand what the value is for your product when you are chasing subscriptions at the top of your funnel, instead of just letting that part go because it would be a little bit easier. I'm someone who believes that, adding as much context as possible and as much research behind your ads is the best way to go. So just figuring out, again, VitaGlow, I'll use it as an example. Again, the benefit that it brings to me, as I embarrassingly admitted, I don't really understand. I think it's just good for my skin to be ingesting collagen like that. And I think it's good for my bones, but don't quote me on that. I just have a hunch from something that I maybe saw on TikTok that it's good for my bones. But what is also good about it for me is I don't eat a lot of or any meat. So I do try to take some kind of fish oil based product. And that's just my own health journey. And so a big benefit for me is that this thing tastes really good. This is not an ad for VitaGlow. I'm just using it as an example. And again, I never really prep the examples. I don't know why. It's been 6 months, but I always feel like they're just something that will come in the moment. And they never really, well, they kind of do. Anyway, so that is a really interesting example, right? Because what I just talked through was I don't really understand why I would take collagen, but I do understand the marine sort of fish oil part of the business. And there's also really interesting notes to kind of pull out of my ramble that I just went on about folks with different diets, folks with different health issues, and a common issue that I found trying to find any type of fish oil based supplement, which is they taste nasty. And VitaGlow has a really nice, wonderful taste. And so that already should kind of get the wheels turning if we were looking at doing some social swarming and top of funnel subscription-based marketing for VitaGlow. That is already a really easy point of entry that's most likely very common. So what I'm trying to indicate here is doing that kind of thinking is really important. Again, even if we know that brand is playing a really big part, you still want to supply user with as much information as possible, and you don't want to get too lazy or complacent about having like a buzzy, trendy brand if you're doing some social swarming, because it won't get you as far as you would get actually doing your homework and doing a good job of the marketing. So wanted to throw that out there. Another big part when we're talking about subscriptions is your page optimization and how much you're testing that landing page experience. I'm not going to get too deep into this because I could talk about this for a really, really, really long time. But thinking about these sort of core basics of subscription-based landing pages, so we're talking price anchoring, we're talking subscription service information, so really front-end loading people. Is it easy to cancel? What does it look like? What's the cadence? I think something I love too, this isn't so much on the design side, but the UX side, allowing people to choose their cadence of subscription is such a good conversion booster. So having a 30-day or a 60-day option and not locking people into one style of subscription, I think just offers a lot of freedom that people are really looking for. A lot of these products, people use them at a different rate. And so accounting for that, love. If you're already doing that, congratulations. Love that for you. Something else I want to talk about is social proof when we're looking at building landing pages specifically for subscription-based funnels. Really hammering home as much kind of engaging UGC that you have, adding it to the page, making sure that it's, if possible, above the fold, especially on PDPs. You're working it into that image gallery. Really important to give people the confidence when you are looking at bringing cold traffic in on a subscription, giving people the confidence that this is a product that people love and come back for time and time again. So thinking through that social proof as well, not just looking at reviews that are like, I love this, it tastes good, but rather reviews that speak to the ease of the subscription as well as the product quality. It's just going to go a long way in creating an environment that's really friendly for a first-time purchaser to be hitting that subscription button. The second part I want to talk about, the kind of more evergreen opportunity and how we can utilize this era of personal brand and personal rebrands to really merchandise our product in an exciting way, is more about messaging, which is exciting because it's a little bit more applicable to everyone. And it's more about brand than it is about product, which I think is a good match. It's like if you are a CPG or beauty brand, subscriptions are important to you. That first half, really important, but more people can kind of lock in and listen to the second half. I guess in retrospect, I could have flipped them, but I think you should listen to the whole episode anyway because it's fun. So diving into the idea of using personal brand and personal rebrand as a toolkit as a marketer is really interesting to me, and I've been doing it a lot. And a big word that comes up for me when I'm doing this work and thinking about how to do this work is resonance. I tried to pause for dramatic effect. I hope that was dramatic, but resonance is the most, in my opinion, important thing to consider as a brand who is looking at sort of deploying strategies to insert themselves into a customer's life in a atypical way. So again, word salad. Let's cut down to the meat. I also think I'm saying word salad a lot because I've been making this like Brussels sprout based salad, and it's so good, and I'm going to have it for lunch right after this. So it's really on my mind. But cutting through, what is valuable there is the idea of creating a brand that is in such lockstep with your target persona that they then start to identify their identity as your brand. They bring that on board and they say, shopping at Vita Glow, that is part of who I am. And it just makes for a much longer term relationship with a customer rather than just, this one product is really cool and it's really trendy and you should purchase it based on that. Instead, you are building yourself into a bit of a legacy in that person's mind and in that person's shopping experience. I experience this a lot personally with beauty brands where it's like, this is just a staple in my setup. This is a staple. Same with body care, staple in my shower. I use it every day. It becomes a ritual. And for me, it's less about the brand, more about the product. But there's like a real different relationship that develops there when you are able to really capture what that person is looking for in your marketing materials. And so I want to talk about some of the strategies that I've been finding success with that I'm really excited about when it comes to really intriguing ways to gain resonance with these target personas. Something I've been doing for the past little while is really thinking deeply about what it means to be a brand versus be a person. Obviously, I talk about it on the podcast a lot. And then once I've separated those two things, I started really thinking about what value a brand can bring to a person external to the actual product they're selling. And I think this is going to really vary based on who you are as a brand and who you're trying to service. One of the brands that I work directly with, what we can really add as a value to someone's life is humor and entertainment. We are silly, we are funny, and we like it that way. And so instead of trying to focus too hard on value that wouldn't really be received by our target persona, I have really zeroed in on this idea that every single time I want them to see a piece of content from our brand, I want it to be a little bit funny, a little bit silly, a little bit not spooky, but just like weird, I guess is the best word to put it. And that is, again, like true value we can bring to them, because I know that they like to get down and they like to have a little laugh and they like to have a key. And that is, I think, a really fundamental piece in scale for this brand that I work with. Over the past year, we had a really successful 2025. And so I was thinking a lot about how to relay this and repeat it with different types of brands. And so I want to go back to the Vita Glow example because it is a really interesting one. And I think there's some interesting things happening in general in that space, especially with consumables like Vita Glow. And so I want to point out the difference in someone who is looking for entertainment and someone who is looking to have a good time and wants to giggle, and someone who is maybe looking for more of a social status sort of gained by purchasing, someone who's looking more for assurance. We've talked about this a lot when we've been talking about omnipresent brand, but that idea of belonging, oftentimes that's going to stem from, really wanting some assurance that yes, you are part of this fold and you're part of this community and you are in the know, you have your consumable collagen and you are super cool and we're all part of the same group. That was a really big sort of aha moment for me personally, starting to audit brands that I was working with directly and really thinking deeply about what is the value that this person is seeking beyond the product from making this purchase. And that opened this whole can of worms for me, where it was like trying to figure out how to express that value through content and creative has been, I feel like I'm still doing it, like a really exciting next chapter in how I'm thinking about marketing and how I'm thinking about content specifically. But I will say one of the most intriguing ways I've been doing this is starting to myself absorb media that my target persona is familiar with. And so I've talked a lot about figuring out online, what are people doing? What are they on Reddit? Are they on Twitter? Weird. Where are they? So I can use the same language that they're using. But I have sort of taken a step back, as I love to do, and started instead focusing on exposing myself to the actual media that they're enjoying when they are offline. So a lot of that is done through I've been looking at movies that this target persona really loves and kind of holds dear to themselves as a overall community. I've been looking at TV shows, I've been looking at music, I've been looking at books, and trying to really figure out culturally, how do I remain in lockstep with this person? Because I learned that they love a reference. They love a cheeky little reference. And so that small learning brought me to this place where it was okay, how can I, again, expose myself to more media that they genuinely enjoy, that's not just internet culture, and then how can I insert that into our marketing materials in a way that's not co-opting what they love and co-opting their culture, but rather cooperating with it. I have said that before. I remember the first time I said it, I think we're doing an all killer, no filler interview with Eric. incredible host, and Eugene Healy, who's a very big brain on the brand side. And I distinctly remember saying that phrase, that as marketers, we need to cooperate with culture rather than co-opting it. And internally at that point, I was like, that eats. And I do think it took about a year for me to really start seeing it in practice in my own work. It was like the idea was there, but now that I'm doing it, I really deeply understand what I meant like a year and a bit ago, which is not taking over the conversation and not, formulating opinions and having the brand produce like weird think pieces about movies that are coming out or commenting on people's content too much. Instead, what the keys to the kingdom has been, at least for us, it's been, again, referential and almost neutral in tone. And so just showing up and being there with these references that are funny, but not necessarily like stating an opinion, because I think that comes back to a point I made earlier where it's like there is a distinction between being a brand and being a person. And so I think all of that has kind of rolled into this current strategy of a high focus on resonance and really figuring out how to speak directly to our target persona, which has been like really exciting to see it unfold so successfully. So basically a higher level of what we often talk about on the pod, which is, looking at digital spaces and figuring out where people are, but now pushing yourself as a marketer to go beyond that and figure out what are people doing off the internet. Crazy, I know. And then wrapping that into your overall strategy and creating that true resonance with your target persona to make sure that, when they are putting together a Pinterest board and thinking about a rebrand, if you are like a fashion retailer, that your products are on that board. Or if you're working in the homewares area, you're making sure that your products are on that board. It's just a way to really think about a longer term relationship to have with a customer rather than just a first purchase, and thinking about things constantly from a CAC point of view, really thinking about how can I make the brand sticky to this person and a new central component to their identity, which sounds spooky to say out loud, but it's not. It's fun and it's cool. And we all have brands that we love and associate ourselves with. This is just sort of the next level of doing that. But yeah, that is the episode. Like I mentioned before, like CPG brands, beauty brands, if subscriptions are something that's important to you, now is a really interesting time to keep pushing that messaging and to not really take your foot off of the personal rebrand type of messaging, because you don't need to. It's kind of evergreen. I was researching Search Insights. You can use that all year long. And I think too, like just continuing to gain momentum on that side is going to be very important if subscriptions are important to you. To continue testing that messaging instead of ditching it after Q1 is going to be so powerful for your brand. So that is the first recommendation. Second one is really focus on how you are resonating with your target personas and do it on a deeper level than just figuring out like who are they and where are they on the internet and what type of content do they look at. Really figuring out like what brings them joy, what is that piece of value you can add to the purchase that's not just the product itself, and really start thinking about yourself as being amongst the pillars of their personal brand. Hopefully that was helpful and exciting and cool. If you guys want to try a consumable collagen, Vita Glow is obviously my recommendation. And yeah, thanks so much for listening. I talked a lot, as I usually do, about segmentation and personas and making sure that you have a really robust strategy when it comes to who you're trying to talk to, because that is the name of the game when it comes to digital marketing right now, specifically on Meta, but across every platform. You need to have that intent before you start making your content. So if that's something you struggle with, you can head over to the Palette House website and fill out a lead form and we can chat directly. You can also hit me up on LinkedIn. My name is AVEs. Which you'd probably know, but you can hit me up on LinkedIn in the DMs. I love chatting to folks about their brand. I just love looking at stuff on the internet. I said this earlier on a call. I love looking at e-commerce sites on the internet, and I love looking at DTC ads on the internet. It is so fun. Like, it's Genuinely, it really geeks me out. So if you do have a brand and you are struggling to figure out who you're talking to, or you're just struggling to like gain that resonance, like I mentioned, you can go to the Palette House website, fill out a lead form, and we can chat directly, or you can hit me up on LinkedIn and we can chat there too. Love a LinkedIn DM, always a good time. Thank you so much for listening, and I will chat to you guys next week.